Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. So my name is Joe. I'm in the Faculty of Education. My specialty is children's literature. And I've given a lot of talks over the years. I've actually given several talks on this topic, but today's talk is very, very meaningful to me because NVS has been a home for my wife and myself since before I started at Cambridge. We came to visit the October before I started in January, and actually came to an NVS meeting. I think it was the first of the year in 2017. And we're just so happy to know that as soon as we arrived, we would have a community of people who were there to support us and to help us, and indeed helped us find the first apartment that we rented, which we moved out of, but we loved the neighborhood so much that my children would not let me buy a house in another neighborhood. So that's to tell you the extraordinary resource that is NVS. So I'm really, really happy to be here. We have so many friends in NVS, and it means a lot to me finally to be up here giving a talk instead of sitting in the audience as I have so many times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of extemporize a little bit with some slides that I have here. And then I'm going to go into one of the chapters from a book that I wrote recently. And when I get to that part, I'm going to read it because it's perfectly written. It's not perfectly written, but it's carefully reasoned, and I don't want to mess up my logic. So when I get to that part, I'll be reading off of the script. But until then, I'll just be extemporizing. So yeah, so today I'm talking about Batman the Animated Series, a series from the 1990s that I loved. And then my children loved, and my wife had to pretend that she loved. And I had an opportunity a few years ago to write a book about it. And it's been one of the most joyous things that I've been able to experience. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. So first I'll talk about my other, and this is in scare quotes, children. My other children are my other books. So as she said, I've published 6 books now. My first book, this was Disciplining Girls. This was 2011, I think. And this is the book that came out of my doctoral thesis. It was about girls' novels, which is one of the other things I care about. I also edited a book. This is a book of essays about The Secret Garden. So if you know this classic novel, The Secret Garden, that's one of the books I talked about in Disciplining Girls. And on the strength of that, I co-edited this collection of essays. Then I co-edited a collection of essays about children and comic books with my friend Michelle Anna Bate. Then I edited a collection of essays about Hergé. And some of you will know Hergé. He's the creator of Tintin, most famously. Good. And then most recently, before the Batman book, this is 2018, I wrote a book called A Literature of Questions. So this was a book about children's nonfiction. Most of the people in my field are literary scholars, and they don't know what to do with nonfiction. So I wrote a book to say, well, let's try to figure this out. Here's what you can think about when you are looking at nonfiction. So these are my other children, and I love all of them. But I have never had as much fun as I had writing this book, which just came out in May, I think it was, of this year. This was an enormous amount of fun to write. In fact, what I did is I would work on other things in the morning, and then during lunch, I would get my lunch, open my computer, turn on the show, watch 2 episodes while eating my lunch and taking notes. And at the end of that hour, I had made some progress on the book and just had a marvelous time while doing it. It hardly felt like work at all. So this is my book about Batman the Animated Series. When I was writing it, actually my passion was a problem because I just kind of wanted to talk about how great the show was. And I knew that if I talked about what I really wanted to talk about, Batman is awesome. This show is awesome. Why are you still reading this book? Put it down and go watch the show because the show is really awesome. That's what I wanted to talk about, and I knew that would be really boring. That would not be a successful book. So I had to think of another way to write this book, another way to approach it. And the best way I thought to interest my readers was rather than just say, this show is awesome, was for me to say, let's go on a journey through the parts of the show that force conversation. So what are the parts of this show that are muddled, that are complicated, that are maybe not awesome? Maybe they're really exciting, but there's also something disturbing about them. So for example, in the middle of the book, I talk about the idea of how this show, how Batman in general supports the idea that what we need is for a wealthy person to come rescue us, which is a disturbing idea. I don't like that idea at all. So the middle of the book is about, well, how does this show deal with that problem? The final third of the book is about a character I'll talk about in a moment, who is both empowering from a feminist perspective and really disturbing from a feminist perspective. So I thought I'll write a chapter trying to figure that character out. Okay, but first I have to introduce you to this, because some of you will know better the 1966 Adam West, Bill Dozier Batman, which is the one with the Biff Bam Pow. This one has no Biff Bam Pow in it whatsoever. It's a very different show. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. First of all, it's a multiple award-winning show. So I have a picture of an Emmy up here. It won multiple Emmy Awards. It is rare for a cartoon to win the kinds of Emmys that it won, in fact. It introduced for the first time outside of the comic books a character named Ra's al Ghul, who then became the chief villain in the Christopher Nolan films. So the first time you saw him outside of a comic book was in this TV show before those films. They also introduced multiple characters, three of whom I'll talk about today, one of them at length. This is Rene Montoya, who is a Latina police officer invented by the show. She then went into the comics. In fact, she becomes a lesbian character in the comics, and then went on. She's actually in the most recent Harley Quinn film. So if you've seen that, she's one of the characters in this Hollywood film as well. She was invented in this show. There's also all sorts of talent that was developed by the show. This is Glenn Murakami. Murakami went on to do all sorts of interesting things, including developing a Teen Titans television show that was tremendously popular. It actually had a sequel. Murakami is the one behind this show and who developed the anime, the sort of Japanese style to it. Then there's James Tucker, who did lots of different things on Batman the Animated Series. He then went on to do multiple other Batman shows and other things himself. They got their start in this show, in fact. So there's a lot of future talent that was developed in Batman the Animated Series. Batman had 2 direct sequels. So this is a Superman show that was developed using exactly the same style and some of the same voice actors and most of the same talent, the writers and directors. And then there was another show called Batman Beyond that came after it that was with the same team, many of the same actors. There were also other shows that were not directly related to Batman that came about because of Batman, both because of the popularity of the show and because the talent in the show helped develop these other properties. This is one of the first Black superheroes to have a mainstream exposure in this way. And there was also a Justice League television show that combined all of these characters together, and it came directly from Batman the Animated Series, again, with much of the same talent. Perhaps most importantly, this is the show in which this character was invented. So if you've heard of Harley Quinn, I mentioned her just a minute ago, so you have heard of her. If you heard of her anywhere else, she's very, very famous. She's very popular right now. In fact, Harley Quinn is the second most popular character, the second highest selling character in all of DC Comics, behind only Batman. So there's Batman, there's Harley Quinn, then there's Superman, then there's Wonder Woman, right? So these other people you know better, she's more popular and sells more comics than they do. And she has 2 films of her own at this point. So she came as well from Batman the Animated Series. So today I'm talking about a piece of one of the chapters that comes from this book. It's a piece of the chapter that deals with this term here, Dark Deco. Dark Deco is the style that the series was done in, that the visuals of the show are done in. You can see it in the font, you can see it in the silhouette. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to play you a clip from a featurette that is on one of the DVDs that comes with the Batman the Animated Series. It will not surprise you to know that I have the entire DVD set with all of the bonuses. So I'm going to show you this clip, and it has an interview with several different people. And one of them says something that is slightly wrong, that leads to a deeper conversation. That is one of the central ideas of the show. So I'm going to show you this clip now.
When I first saw Batman the Animated Series, it was groundbreaking. What it did, it captured style and tone that was completely different from anything else that we've seen in cartoon. We call it Dark Deco. Dark Deco world with some computer technology going for it. It's just another dimension of a contemporary world. In my mind, it was sort of like, what if the 1939 World's Fair had gone on another 60 years or so, and the cool sense of design and stylishness from the Art Deco years was in operation well up until the 90s. That way you could have kind of a round look to the cars and a stylish look to the buildings. You could have television and computers, but everything would have a black and white screen. You could believe that Batman could operate in a world that looked like that.
All right, perfect. So the last person to talk in that clip is Paul Dini. Paul Dini is the Emmy-winning writer who is most famously associated with the series. He started out as one of the writers, and by the end was one of the main editors for the show. So he's absolutely central to the show. As he's detailing the hallmarks of Dark Deco, he identifies aspects of the style that he associates with the 1939 World's Fair and Art Deco. So you'll remember he says, in my mind, it was like, what if the 1939 World's Fair had gone on another 60 years or so, and the cool sense of design and stylishness from the Art Deco years was in operation well up to the 1990s. So of course, what he's taking for granted here is that the 1939 World's Fair was an example of Art Deco, that it was one of the high points of Art Deco. And there are a lot of people who think this for reasons that we can get to later. So he identifies aspects of Dark Deco with the 1939 World's Fair and Art Deco. And even looking at this poster, you can probably already see some similarities between what I've shown you with the show and what was happening at the World's Fair. Now, broadly speaking, there's nothing wrong with this, with his choice of words. But in recent decades, art historians have argued that the 1939 World's Fair is better understood as the biggest demonstration not of Art Deco, but the movement immediately following it. A movement that was largely founded on a rejection of the lavish materials, the design of Art Deco, a movement now named after one of the most popular design principles of the 1930s, the movement known as streamlining. So Dini's comment then is not wrong as such, but it is caught up in a confusion about two artistic movements, Art Deco and streamlining. And it is in the murkiness of his observation that I want to play. Remember I said I was looking for where there were good conversations to force. This is a point of confusion, so it's perfect for a conversation. The difference between Art Deco and streamlining on display at the 1939 World's Fair is not just a semantic difference. It's not just a difference in the names. It's a difference between philosophies that says a great deal about thematic tensions that are embedded in the place and what I call the eternal present of Gotham City, which of course is the setting. The most explicit example of streamlining's influence on the Dark Deco style comes in a November 1992 episode. So this is quite early in the run. The first of a two-parter named Heart of Steel. In this episode, Carl Rossum, pictured here, who is one of Wayne Enterprises' only true rivals in the development of computer technology, Carl Rossum has secretly created an advanced artificial intelligence. This is a picture here. So the name of this advanced artificial intelligence is HARDAC. HARDAC stands for Holographic Analytical Reciprocating Digital Computer. Now, HARDAC's design, you can see down here, there are people. So this is huge. This is not a normal desktop computer. This is a huge, tall computer. HARDAC's design directly echoes the design of one of the most famous and recognizable buildings from the 1939 World's Fair, namely the Ford Pavilion. So the Ford Pavilion is one of the most recognizable buildings from the World Fair. If you put the two of them next to each other, you can see this was clearly inspired by that. They were clearly looking at the Ford Pavilion when they came up with the idea of hard hat. It has a tall central pillar flanked by sturdy square pillars on either side. The prominent rounding of Hardak's central pillar matches the bold forward curve of the pavilion's central pillar. We'll come back to that curve in a minute to see why that's important. A major design difference between the two is that the profile of the pavilion, in keeping with streamlining in general, is smooth and unmarked. So streamlining tended not to put things on the facade. But the details found on Hardak are those of which other examples of streamline were quite fond. So whereas here it's just flat, here we've got this banding that goes out to the side. For example, the horizontal banding of the structure to the left and right of Hardak was one of the most recognizable motifs of streamlining, with long sweeping lines parallel to the ground. You can see this on the Pan Pacific Auditorium in Los Angeles, the City Hall building in Maywood, California, and diners and gas stations across the country throughout the 1930s and 40s. Streamlining itself is marked by a few consistent design features, many of them constellated around a frankly silly engineering principle. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk to you about how these design principles actually all come from an idea from engineering, a silly idea from engineering. The 1932 publication of Norman Bell Geddes' book, Horizons, which was a sort of industrial designer's manifesto for streamlining, marked the coalescence of the style. So this is the handbook for streamlining. If you want to know what it's about or how to do it, this is the book you go to. In Geddes' work, we see the horizontal banding and the rounded front, for example, that we've already seen in Hardak. Even more important to streamlining, though, was the teardrop shape. This right here is the teardrop shape. So you see there that rounded front, right? So the teardrop shape could appear in a pure three-dimensional form as a sphere that tapers to a point, or as here, it could be flattened into a two-dimensional suggestion, whether in its natural state with the point at the top, or turned on its side as though falling not down, but forward with the ease and speed of rainfall. For streamlining, the idealized teardrop was the pure form from which other shapes were derived. It was this form that nature itself designed to move liquid through air with the least resistance, or so they thought. And therefore, it was the form best suited to the task of moving everything through the inevitable resistance of the atmosphere. So the teardrop shape, this is, you cannot overemphasize the importance of this when it comes to streamlining. Streamlining, especially as understood through its central metaphor, the teardrop, could be applied to every aspect of middle-class life, from a streamlined stove designed by Geddes himself, to a woman's streamlined silhouette, to Royal Streamline's flatware, to Firestone's streamlined tire, which was also designed by Geddes, and blue Sonico oil for streamlined cars, an oil that claimed to be chemically engineered in keeping with the principles exhibited by, quote, a falling drop of water. And it guaranteed to provide your car with, quote, all caps, streamlined action. Now, as even these few examples make clear, streamlining was less a movement dedicated to a set of specific hallmarks than it was dedicated to a concept. Flatware, the kinds of things we use to cut our steak with, flatware hardly needed to move through the air efficiently, right? No amount of chemical engineering could produce a gasoline that would make the car burning it more aerodynamic. The horizontal banding of a diner had no impact on the speed with which it sat on its foundation. Even the teardrop, the central image of streamlining, was more a conceit than an actual principle. As other scholars have written, for the generation that designed and consumed streamlined products, the fact that a falling drop of water assumed other forms was immaterial. It looked that way just before it fell from a tap, and artists had long been using the convention to depict teardrops. In the years that scholars call the streamlined decade, The teardrop form became both a symbol and a Platonic ideal, approximations of which seemed to hold promise in reducing waste and increasing speed. Industrial design, which was itself largely an invention of the 1930s, led the way in developing an aesthetic in which appearing to move effortlessly through space was more important than actually moving effortlessly through space. Streamlining was therefore highly recognizable as a visual style, but that style is best understood as an expression of an idea of efficiency and grace. It was an artistic representation of a misunderstanding of a scientific principle. That's what streamlining was. Constellated around the concept were metaphors that echo in the philosophy of Hardak. So we've talked already about the look of Hardak. Now I'm talking about the philosophy of Hardak, what Hardak was trying to accomplish. For other scholars, the visual hallmarks of streamlining, especially on objects that had no need of advanced aerodynamic design, spread across popular culture to support an image of effortless, frictionless motion. Streamlining promised a society characterized by conservation, economy, efficiency, and machines would make that society possible, as they permitted rational design and control of a social order as perfect as human nature could design. It is this utopian aim that guides Hardak. Rossum, this fellow here who invented Hardak, Rossum originally programmed Hardak to help him build human bodies that could survive injury. To allow Hardak to pursue what comes to be known as their plan, Rossum not only designs the computer with extraordinary intelligence, but also allows it self-determination. Inevitably, though, Hardak comes to feel that human beings are too flawed to help with the execution of the plan. Humans make errors in judgment, Hardak explains. It is sometimes necessary to protect them from their own inadequacies. Eventually, Hardak replaces Rossum with a robot, worrying that Rossum's human imperfection endangers the plan. Hardak determines that Rossum must be improved upon. Other scholars have noted that the New York World's Fair of 1939 was dedicated to, quote, building the world of tomorrow with the tools of today. And Hardak offers that possibility. In the same way that Hardak's body incorporates the visual elements of streamlining, its goals champion the philosophy of streamlining. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm skipping over the countless other examples of streamlined design evident in the visuals of the series. If you're terribly interested, I can go on about this forever later on, but there are lots and lots of examples. You just have to trust me. Streamlining is everywhere in the world of this show. So I'm going to get to the consequences of this design for the theme of the show, which I think is the central irony of the show. What so many of the episodes, the Hardak episodes, certainly among them, what they express thematically, visually, and in terms of their streamlined era setting is a longing for and resistance to the future promised by streamlining. Okay, so once more, a longing for and resistance to the future promised by streamlining. So you'll remember that Paul Dini talked about this as Art Deco. Now, obviously, Art Deco is where the term Dark Deco comes from. I'm contrasting Art Deco and streamlining. The difference between Art Deco and streamlining is much more than a name. It's much more than semantic. Although both are modern styles, by which I mean they're early 20th century styles, by the time that Art Deco as a term gained currency in the 1970s, it was used to appeal to a nostalgia for the frivolity and stylishness of the 20s. So by the time that we were using Art Deco as a term, it was used to appeal to nostalgia, frivolity, and stylishness of the 1920s, not the 1930s, the 1920s. Streamlining, on the other hand, was not interested in nostalgia. It was certainly not interested in the nostalgia for the economic excesses of the 1920s that had preceded and probably led to the economic despair of the 1930s. The indulgences of the 20s were replaced by a period of national disillusionment and confusion during the streamlining era. With unemployment hovering around 25% in the United States, during exactly the years in which streamlining emerged into the public consciousness. America in the 1930s yearned not backward, but forward. And streamlining spoke clearly to that impulse. In the stagnant economy of the Depression, one scholar notes, getting things moving again was a common desire. And you can see how streamlining, which didn't make sense from an engineering principle, but did make sense from an artistic perspective, could appeal to this idea of moving faster into the future rather than looking backwards, which is what Art Deco did. To people struggling with the hopelessness of the Depression, the streamlined form came to symbolize progress and the promise of a better future. To the major figures of industrial design, that form and the discipline that wielded it would both reverse the Depression's plummeting sales and create a harmonious environment, unknown since the Industrial Revolution. So, because the show mingles a style indebted to Art Deco with a setting that is steeped in streamlining, the producers of Batman the Animated Series created a world touched by the disastrous excesses of the 1920s that simultaneously yearned optimistically for the better future promised by the new design of the 1930s. The conflict between Art Deco and streamlining articulates one of the most powerful ironies of Batman as a whole, whether he's found in the animated series, the live action TV show, the live action films, or the comic books. There's this one irony that comes up over and over again that this conflict gets right to the heart of. Batman's story is in large part about how working hard leads to improvement. He himself is an example of this, right? He starts out as a little boy, he studies hard, he exercises, he trains, he perfects himself. Batman's story is about being perfectible. The murder that birthed Batman is horrific, but it spurs young Bruce to become a better person, to become, in fact, the best person. Human beings are perfectible, and the existence of Batman in Gotham proves that fact. In this way, Batman's origin and heroic emergence are perfectly suited to a story of the streamlining era. As technology, efficiency, and an imaginative application of science to every aspect of life fed an optimism about the possibilities of human achievement. However, the larger story of Batman, the ongoing ever-present tense battle, shows absolutely no improvement. Gotham is always soaked in crime. Victories are isolated. They are literally episodic because they happen from one episode to the next. Batman is a story of human perfectibility that is possible on the individual scale, but never at the societal scale. And so the hero's city is mired in an unending present. Streamlining's optimism helps the show represent the lingering tragedy, the daily failure of the future ever to arrive in Gotham City. The irony of a future that never arrives in a city designed around the principle of streamlining manifests across the history of Batman the Animated Series. Now, I don't have time to consider all the examples of how, for example, Poison Ivy, Two-Face, and again, Harley Quinn, how they all experience opportunities to leave the cycle of crime and imprisonment only to fall into a kind of stalled present. I do, however, want to spend a moment looking at another character, the villain, Baby Doll. Don't you love that face, Baby Doll? So Baby Doll is a lesser known villain. She was created for the animated series. I don't think she's ever appeared outside of the animated series. She only appears in 2 episodes, but she's one of my favorite inventions of the show. She's a complicated, strange character. So Baby Doll is a lesser known villain. She's the most tragic, I think, of all of these villains who continually fail to escape the past, who continually have an opportunity to leave crime and imprisonment behind and then fail to take advantage of that opportunity. So she was first introduced in an episode that bears her name. Baby Doll, so Baby Doll is her villain name. She is the washed up actress Mary Dahl, D-A-H-L. She was pretty much doomed from birth, right? She was always going to be Doll. So Mary Dahl, she was an actress. She was a national sensation in the television show Love That Baby, where she coyly recited the catchphrase, "I didn't mean to," in every episode. Okay, so that's who we're dealing with here. She's a victim of a disease they invented for the show, systemic hypoplasia. Sounds impressive, it's not real. Systemic hypoplasia, which is a fictional disease in which the mind and body continue to mature, but the body doesn't. And that's why, even though she's an adult, she still looks like a child in the shows that we have. So this means that she was never able to escape casting as a child, even when she turned to more serious roles. So in her first episode in Batman the Animated Series, Baby Doll tries to recreate the episode of her show in which she believes everything went wrong. So she captures the other actors, she goes back to the set, and she tries to recreate that episode of her show where her life went wrong. Batman and Robin intervene, Baby Doll's plans fall apart, and Batman chases her into a carnival. So there's a carnival nearby. There's always a carnival nearby in Gotham City. There's always a full moon. There's always a creepy old carnival nearby in Gotham City. So Batman chases her into a carnival. The scene I'm going to show you now picks up at this point where she's run into a hall of mirrors trying to escape Batman. And I'll just say one more time, she has this catchphrase that she used to say when she was on TV. It goes, "I didn't mean to." She says it in this really coy child voice. You're going to hear that come up here too.
Look, that's me in there, the real me. There I am. But it's not really real, is it? Just made up and pretend like my family and my life and everything else. Why couldn't you just let me make believe?
Isn't that marvelous? I love that. So as you may have picked up, I love this show. That is one of my very favorite scenes throughout the whole series. I think it's just tremendous. Now, I'm out of time, so I'm going to skip to the big finish here. Baby Doll is a great example of how there's this longing for the future, but this inability to ever achieve it. She can never grow out of this past, right? Out of the past that she's had. So here's the final paragraph then. When another scholar writes about streamlining's optimism, he uses a turn of phrase that is oddly suited to Batman, the Animated Series. The repeated assertions that streamlining's teardrop represented the ultimate, most functional form for a vehicle contained a logical corollary, he explains. That corollary is that after the streamlined style transformed the environment, society would be housed in a static, eternally perfect machine. In Batman, the Animated Series, however, the static, eternally perfect machine is the city of Gotham, trapping its heroes and villains in the endlessly stretching shadow of the New York World's Fair. And that's it. Thank you very much.